welcome to Fast Forward, part of an ongoing conversation about living in the future. I'm Dan Costa, editor-in-chief of PCMag.com, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to talk about technology, we're going to talk about design, we're going to talk about podcasts, and here to talk to us about all of those things is Debbie Millman. Debbie, thanks so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Dan. It's great to be here.
You are a writer, an educator, a designer, a brand consultant, I think sort of brand expert and branding expert. One of the most influential designers today, and I did not write that. That was my staff that wrote that. You're the author of two books, multiple books, Look Both Ways and Brand Thinking, but I first discovered you through your podcast, which is excellent. It's called Design Matters. It's been going for a very long time, and we'll have to decide whether or not we want to say how long.
12 years.
12 years?
12 and a half years, yeah, it's crazy.
Really multiple waves of podcasts going into fashion, going out of fashion. Yep. And you've been there and seen it all, so we're going to get into that a little bit.
Okay.
But it's a great show. And if you've got questions, you're watching on Facebook Live, you can ask your questions in the comment section below. Social Pete will read those out to us. If you're watching this on tape delay or listening to the podcast later, alas, we cannot answer your questions in real time. That's just the way this works. So thanks for coming on the show, but this is not your first visit to PC Magazine.
No, it isn't my first visit to PC Magazine, not by a long shot.
So when were you first acquainted with PC Mag?
1985.
And what were you doing here then?
I was freelancing. I was freelancing for the promotion design department, and I shared an office with a wonderful woman named Stephanie Aaron, who's still a designer as well. We sat back to back. We each had our own drafting table, and I got really, really good at drawing the PC Magazine logo with the rapidograph. And we did basic layout and paste up for the promotion department, so that meant anybody that got the magazine in the mail at the time, that's how it was distributed. That was the only way it was distributed, unless you bought it on the newsstand. Those pesky little blow-in cards, I designed those.
Nice. Which everyone who, and I worked in print, I worked at Computer Shopper at Ziff Davis in the same title. Everybody would complain about those cards.
They did.
Everybody would rail against them and say, why do you put them in your magazines? Everybody hates them. Because they worked. They were the #1 way to get subscriptions.
And I felt good about that, given that I took responsibility for some of the subscription increase because of my blow-in cards.
And the subscriptions were, I mean, dynamite back then. It was super. It's a successful website now, but it was a super successful magazine then. And part of it was because of those blow-in cards. So you deserve some of that.
Thank you. Well, I not only freelanced for several years for a wonderful man named Dan Bond and John Minuchek, I also, once I had my own design firm, PC Magazine was actually really good to me and gave me a lot of work in those first years. So
yes. There was a lot of work to go around that.
There was. It was a really interesting time to be working in this business.
So obviously, like a lot of us who got our start in media, we started off in print, we evolved to digital. What was that like for you as a designer to move from print-based blow-in cards to digital media, which extends across all these different devices?
Well, it was a bit hazardous. Haphazard, I guess, is the best way to put it. We were living through it, so we didn't know at first whether it was going to really take hold. Like, I remember back in '87 or thereabouts when CDs first came out, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to make the transition. I loved collecting albums. I still have all my albums. And I remember when Sinead O'Connor's album came out, The Lion and the Cobra. It was a beautifully designed cover. And I remember having to weigh, do I want to buy the album? Do I want to buy the CD? Because that was what was happening. And I ended up buying the CD. I'm very grateful that I did that, but it was a big decision at the time. And I remember even thinking, do I want to learn how to set type on the computer, or should I stick with my hand skills? And ended up, again, coming late. I came late to that decision and ultimately began learning on Quark Express. So I know that you like that too, in the early 90s.
Yeah, I mean, that was when I was getting my start in the business. I think we were speaking earlier, that was how I got my first job. Was there were a bunch of editors and there were a bunch of great writers and they're all looking for jobs in the media industry in New York. No one else knew how to use Quark Express to do desktop publishing.
I have mad skills on Quark Express.
Mine were not
it's sad that it's really pretty much something that I can't use anymore. But
well, now everything's drag and drop.
Everything's drag and drop.
I mean, to just make corrections, you don't have to be a designer. And you don't have to know special software. And that's all I was really doing.
It helps when you do, though. Yeah. It really does help when you do. But I did have really good skills for a really long time on that somewhat now defunct program.
Yeah, it's I was a Quark fan and I used to put down Illustrator and all the other Adobe apps. But you teach students.
I do.
And, Quark Express was a huge thing for me, helped me get my first job. Is there something similar in today's, for designers going out into the workplace, or 21-year-olds that are starting their careers, that you tell them, look, you really need this in your skill set?
Well, you definitely need your good Adobe chops. You absolutely have to know InDesign, Photoshop. Those are really important. Illustrators, really important for designers as well. But now you have to know how to code. I tell all my students, learn how to code. It's sort of like learning Spanish in 3rd grade. Mm-hmm. When you're still young and you still have that sort of, agile mind, that's when you should do it. You shouldn't be learning how to code when you're middle-aged. Yeah. You should be learning how to code when you're a kid. And so I tell everybody that I teach, whether it be grad or undergrad, learn how to code. You will be so glad you did.
Just to understand some of the basic building blocks, even if you're not actually going to be a coder, just to understand the potential of what's possible.
Yeah, I think designers have to be polymaths now. They have to know how to write, they have to know how to use Photoshop, they have to know how to edit, they have to know motion, they have to know how to be able to create, launch, load, and promote all their own content.
One of the things I was thinking about in the digital age is that there's this new format of this 64 by 64-bit square that is going to be the icon that represents your brand on mobile apps. It's going to represent it on the web and all these different places. That's not, that thumbprint-sized icon didn't really exist when
it didn't exist, and I came to it again really somewhat late, somewhat reluctantly. When I first started Design Matters, it was in many ways a response to all of the corporate work I was doing, and I wanted to keep it as pure as possible. And as somebody that did branding for a living, I didn't want it to be this overly branded experience. First of all, I didn't know that podcast was going to turn into this industry that it is now. And so I didn't have a logo for years. I did not have a logo. All my little square said was Design Observer, which is where the show is originally hosted, and Design Matters. That was it. That was it. And it wasn't until, so now we're in 2017, it wasn't until I think 2014 or 2015 that my dear friend Armin Witt was finally just like, okay, consider this an intervention. You need a logo. Aaron Draplin did the same thing. The incredible designer Aaron Draplin came to the show for an interview. I was interviewing him and had designed logos for me.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice. Yeah. He brought a present.
He did. He brought me an identity.
Instead of a housewarming gift?
Several. He gave me like 5 or 6 to choose from.
A podcast warming gift.
Yes.
Where I brought logos for you. We can work through them live on air, and you can give feedback.
Yeah, but no, I mean, I grew up in a 12.5 by 12.5 inch world of record albums.
Record albums in pages. And you still see that on the web a lot. And you could probably even see it on PCMag.com, where these pages were designed for 8.5 by 11 magazine formats, and they're translating onto the web, and they just have a bottomless, an endless scroll. But that's not necessarily web design.
Right.
What do you think about the state of web design as you see it out there today? And you have to, I guess, include the advertising with it.
Well, I mean, now we're seeing a lot of millennials ad blocking, and it'll be very interesting to see where that whole journey takes us. Millennials don't want to be bombarded by ads. But so what is so interesting to me, though, is how willingly they accept native content or native advertising. It's not even native content. And first of all, let's just talk as you're an editor. I am a magazine, a magazine file. When did the words content and assets become so popular?
Yeah.
Back in our day, it was editorial and art. Now, that's aging us. I'm a little bit older than you, I think, but I still love using those words. I still love the idea of editorial and art, even if it is part of some sort of native situation. I still feel that content deserves a better word.
Than content.
Yeah.
I have that in one of my titles. I have editor in my other title, and I think I like that one better.
Yeah.
But I think there is...
It's much more glamorous. Content isn't a glamorous word. It's sort of just a, I don't know.
Content, it's better than product.
Oh, God.
Which also gets passed around a great deal in the tech sector.
Yeah.
And there is this blend where tech companies tend to think, and actually in a lot of tech companies, design gets folded up under product. It's just a function of product.
Or engineering.
And engineering that
Yeah,
also...
that's when you get really good design, when it's really like sort of in the engineering department.
I mean, what do you, I mean, are there companies that you know of that are getting this mix right between brand building, design experience, but then also having that product UX?
I think the New York Times is doing, believe it or not, I think the New York Times is doing one of the best jobs out there, integrating the sort of old school experience with really interesting online motion graphics. They're doing some beautiful, they did a great job with Christoph Niemann a couple of months ago. They sent him on a cruise ship to Antarctica, and he did these beautiful illustrations, and then he hacked a program and created all of this motion stuff so you could sort of feel like you were there. They were funny, they were heartbreaking, they were educational, and you know, I wouldn't have expected that from the New York Times. They still have a gorgeous magazine, they have great digital content, digital-only content. I think they're doing a terrific job.
They don't treat every piece of content or every story the same way.
Right.
So I'm sure, I don't remember if I saw in that story whether there was advertising on those pages, but they're not...
Good that you don't remember then, because it couldn't have had that much of a distraction to you.
They will pull the ads off, a
Yeah.
high-profile piece, because they want to have that custom experience. They invested a lot of time into it. They want the repeat visitors and the shareability more than they want to have ad inventory.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you go and you get sports scores every day, or you go and you check the news, relatively standard layout to just get you the information that you need.
I mean, one of the interesting things that I think they'll have to contend with over time is the timeliness of the paper. So I'll get the weekend paper, and I'll have already read 90% of it on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and I don't even realize that the content that they're featuring in the Sunday paper is actually coming out on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. I just think it has come out that day for everybody. And so by the time I get the paper, the thing that I like about magazines, paper magazines and papers, and any kind of tangible format, is the surprise factor of turning the page and not necessarily know what you're going to see. You're not looking for something, you're just experiencing something. And I love that aspect of any type of educational experience or any kind of news experience. And part of what happens on the web is that you're looking for a column, you're looking for a writer, you're looking for something, and in the process you may not discover quite as much.
Yeah, I recently started subscribing to The New Yorker again in print because I love the content.
Yes.
Like everybody else, I was overwhelmed by how much content they were putting out on a weekly basis in print. So I stopped subscribing, I don't know, years and years ago. But that's never content that I'm going to go out and search for.
Right, exactly.
Like I will never look for those stories.
Right. How are you going to find the poetry?
So I went years without reading any of it. And now I don't read every one. I don't read every one cover to cover. But I do have that weekly discovery process. And that's increasingly rare in this sort of Facebook algorithm-generated content world that we live in.
Absolutely, and the covers and the caption contest. That's how I sort of stay up to date.
Yeah, and I hope that there's still room for that in the New Yorker level. I think in the New York Times for papers, I think it's going to be really hard for people to maintain those printed experiences.
I agree. That concerns me, that worries me. But that might just be me showing my age. There might be no reason why just an online digital experience isn't perfectly reasonable for the rest of the world in a year or two.
So let's talk a little bit, we were talking earlier about the democratization of branding.
Yes.
Most people think about brands, they think about big corporations who are putting together their icons and basically putting their stamp on everything they produce.
Yes.
But there's a different type of branding that's happening that you see a lot online now.
I'm super excited about this. I have never been as excited about a development in a business industry in my lifetime. Having worked in the branding business now for decades, and having worked on some of the biggest brands in the world, whether it be Burger King or Hershey's or Gillette or, I mean, hundreds, literally hundreds and hundreds of brands. Brands have always, first of all, up until I would say the last 10 years or so, it was sort of seen as the devil's work. People weren't like, oh, really? Wow, you did that logo. Most of it was like, you know, you get that face. In the last 10 years, people now associate branding a lot more with design. But it's always been associated as a for-profit business that is very much about shareholder value, that is very much about a return on investment, that's very much about money. And what's happened now in the last couple of years is we've seen it happen in the democratization of design, the ability that people have to make and mark things with their computers and so on and so forth. What we're seeing now is branding being used not as a vehicle for marketing for money, but as a way to create momentum for people that want to make a difference. And so we've started to see that with the Peace Eiffel Tower mashup logo that came out after the terror attacks in France, which was this visual device that was used to signify a movement. Now, obviously, these roots go all the way back to the rainbow flag and so forth.
But it was, it was being attached to Twitter profiles. So people would change their Twitter profile in solidarity.
So this signifies not something that I want to sell you, not something that I want you to go out and buy, but something that I want you to believe. And so we started to see that with the device used after the terror attacks. We started to see that being used as a hashtag, Black Lives Matter. We're not selling anything. We want to change culture with these brands. And then what I think is the most successful brand device, brand campaign of the century thus far is the pink pussy hat.
That happened quickly.
That happened really fast, but that's what happens with branding.
I remember I was surprised at how quickly I was like, oh, this might be a thing, and then overnight, it was in the street and there were marches.
Yeah, and it's extraordinary. But those marks are no different than a cross, a crucifix, a star. These are all symbols. They're constructs that we create to signify meaning. We have created these devices as meaning makers. They're manufacturing meaning. And the fact that we can now do this in an effort to join people together, to make change, to me that is the most exciting development in branding in the discipline of branding.
And I think social media and helping to spread those types of things, that's what enables it. You don't have to read it in the newspaper or see it on TV in order to clue in. You notice it in your feeds. You notice it on Facebook, you notice it on Twitter, on Instagram, and all of your feeds.
I mean, these are just Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. They've all been able to, these platforms have democratized communication. It's democratized communication. I mean, what was the first big way people began to know about each other? Television, radio and television. But you had to have enough money to either pay for something to get on television or be talented enough to get your own television show on television or on the radio. Now, anybody can broadcast anything. That's an incredibly exciting thing. It can be really dangerous when used in the wrong hands, but it also, again, but that's the whole world of democratization. Everybody and anybody can use it for good or for harm. We make those decisions.
We've got a question from the audience.
Is it important to teach new and younger students the history of print design and editorial, even though it's not the way most media is created today?
It's a great question. People always ask about the history of anything when they're starting out and learning. Is this important for me to know? Is it important to know hard history? Is it important to know about the geography of the world 5,000 years ago? I don't think it's critical in that you can't do it without it. I think it's better. The more educated you are, the more likely you are to be able to bring that knowledge into your work to break new ground. And so the more you know that has happened, the more you can make combinatorial creations. You can take those things that you know, combine them with other things that you know, and develop something new. And so I think it's not absolutely necessary, but I think it's better when you have that knowledge.
So we've talked a little bit about brands in the visual space, looking into new frontiers, new interfaces in the voice space. Amazon Alexa, yesterday was Prime Day. The Amazon Alexa, hugely popular device. It seems like we're going to be talking to our devices a lot more in the future. Where do brands fit into that experience? I
think it's really interesting, just as the notion of we're really excited about talking to these little machines, these little devices, but we've become completely uninterested in talking on the telephone.
I hate talking on the telephone.
Everybody hates talking on the telephone now. And people, when was the last time you really got a phone call from somebody that needed to reach you besides somebody asking you, we sure we're meeting here, but even that is a text, generally speaking. Now the phone rings, people think somebody died.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting culturally that we're willing and able and excited to talk to these little sort of cylindrical things, but yet not so interested in talking on the phone.
It's not a very personal relationship, at least not yet. It's
Yeah.
very commanding. I want this, I want that, do this for me. But I mean, when it actually accomplishes those tasks, it almost cuts out the brands entirely. Like it's such a direct experience for the consumer.
It's interesting. I love being able to order things online. I love being able to schedule appointments online. I love that ease and transparency of not having to deal with humanity. What does that say about me? I don't know. But I think that everything is designed. Every experience is designed. If it isn't designed, then somebody will create their own design. So I think that it will have as much impact on the way we make and create things as any other technological development.
We've got another question from the audience.
This is awesome. I love this.
Keep 'em
Yes.
What are your thoughts on brands repurposing the work of others, like Supreme taking Barbara Kruger's art?
I think that I know that Supreme did it initially. I believe that Supreme did it initially without asking Barbara Kruger her permission. In fact, when I first before I knew about the brand, I was on eBay looking at Barbara Kruger stuff and saw a Supreme ashtray and thought, how cool, Barbara Kruger's using this word in this interesting way, and it's an ashtray. And I ordered it and bought it, and then I was like, oh, it's not Barbara Kruger. Now that they have worked it out, I'm happy, because I think it furthers her work and it makes something that they're doing more artistic. As long as you have permission, as long as it becomes a collaboration and not thievery, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and you see a lot of skirmishes in the copyright area where copywriting design, copywriting style, it's just is it different enough?
Yeah.
God knows we've seen the tech companies go after each other over their phone designs, where they all kind of look the same.
Yeah.
I mean, it gets a little ridiculous to spend this much money on these copyright battles.
Absolutely. And if you feel that things in a category do look too much the same, there's the opportunity for innovation. There's the white space. Make it different.
So everybody credits Apple with being one of those companies that zigged when everybody else zagged and used different colors, different materials, different design sensibilities.
Yeah.
Do they deserve the credit for getting technology and design right?
Yes. Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. What I'm bothered by in the tech category, and it's in some ways hard to avoid, but what bothers me is the forced obsolescence, the planned obsolescence. When you get something without knowing that 3 weeks later something better is coming, and then a big announcement comes, and I'm like, but I wasn't an early adopter and I just bought this thing. Now it's not the newest thing anymore. And so I think that if there were a way to communicate with consumers to let them know that new things are coming, get people excited about it. The notion that we know this, we see it in the fashion business, we see it in the car business, that we know that these new models are coming. We know that at some point those shoes aren't going to be fashionable anymore. We expect that, and we know that fashion is like that. We know that what we're wearing now will likely not be fashionable in 12 months. But to not know that something is being planned that is going to change the way we do things, that then requires consumers to keep amping up, anteing up, I feel like that is not fair. It's not fair for the loyalists that want the latest things.
Yeah, and I think we're sort of getting a new rhythm, especially when it comes to phones. People understand there's always going to be something new. They're not going to last forever. You've got a 2-year cycle, maybe 3, before you go back into the market. But across the board, I mean, you look at how people are designing products that can't be opened. They can't be repaired. They can't be upgraded.
Right.
You know, there was a time when we were starting off in PCMag where you could keep the same PC and just upgrade your processor or just your hard drive.
Right.
That doesn't happen anymore. You have to throw the whole thing out and get a whole new system.
I mean, the one thing that I am really happy that Apple finally realized is the needing to have universal power cords. I mean, it was ridiculous. Every time you got a new device, you ended up having to buy, because you want one for your bag and you want one for your house and maybe you want one in your desk at the office. And it's like, I don't want to spend another $120 on power cords.
Yeah. The worst offenders in that space, Fitbit, you know, they've got 25 different types of trackers. Every one comes with a different charger.
That's just
and you
wrong.
can't reuse them.
Yeah.
So even if you've got 2 Fitbit trackers, you're going to have 2 power cables.
Yeah, it's disrespectful to the consumer. It's disrespectful to the loyalists.
Debbie says so, and bad design. We got another question from the audience.
What does personal branding mean to you? And do you think that people should think of this in the same way that they would think about branding a company?
It's a really great question. I think that the notion of personal branding is a bit dangerous in that brands are built by people and they are, again, constructs. Humans aren't constructs. Humans have souls and they are malleable, and you hope that they evolve and change and grow and do surprising, unpredictable things. You want to be able to fail at things so you can learn. So I think if you see yourself as a brand, you end up creating a barrier around your ability to grow and evolve in a way that you should. I think you can have a certain way of looking at the work that you do in terms of being able to market it in a way that people know that it's yours, or to be able to develop a visual style that perhaps can be recognized, but you still want to keep evolving that. So if you see yourself as a human first, but with ways in which you want to use your humanity to grow and communicate and develop, I think that you run the, you are able to build something that has more viability, more longevity, and more purpose. If you see yourself as a brand, you're essentially seeing yourself as a soulless product, and I think you run the risk of being obsolete really quickly.
That's a great answer. So I think at this point we can call you a podcast veteran. It's gone through.
You know what? The best and most awesome thing that anybody has said to me in my life was said by Roman Mars on his podcast. He called me the OG of podcasters, and I didn't know what that meant.
That is high praise.
And so I have a friend who's like super cool, my friend Dee Dee Gordon. She's a futurist. I knew she would know what that meant. And so I texted her, I'm like, what is the OG of podcasters? Is that a good thing? Should I be upset or should I be happy? She wrote back, dude, that's like the best thing anybody can say about you. And I was like, awesome.
You should put that on your resume and
I
your
think
LinkedIn
it'll be on my
profile,
tombstone.
also known as
Thank you, Roman.
OG of podcasting. So we've only been doing this podcast for about 6 months now, but I feel like we may be getting to another inflection point where everyone's got a podcast. Is it a mainstream media? How have you seen it? Are you optimistic for the future of podcasting?
Oh yeah, I'm optimistic for any technology that's growing. It takes you to new places, and it proves unequivocally that radio is not dead. I think that it's just a different type of radio. No, I'm super excited about it. I'm super excited about it. And it gives me great optimism for this specific kind of discipline, to see the kind of storytelling, the kind of sharing, the kinds of self-growth that people can get from it, the ability for anybody to be able to do it. You need a microphone, and you're good, and it's really exciting.
It takes me more than just one person. I need a team behind me to pull it off.
Well, you have a fancy set.
Super fancy.
Yeah, I have a very sort of small operation. It's me and my producer. We've been going for, I mean, I've been doing the show for 12 and a half years, but I've been working with Curtis Fox for close to 10, so it's exciting.
So you've got a fall season coming up of
I
Design
do.
Matters.
I do.
You're super excited about it. What can we expect?
Well, the show has been evolving, and I'm excited about the way it's evolving. And it's evolving because I've been doing it for a long time, and it's also evolving because of the way that podcasts are evolving. So the show, while having the name Design Matters, in some ways it's become a misnomer. It's not only about designers talking about design, which in the beginning was very inside baseball, and I wanted it to sort of be inside baseball. Now it's become more about how creative people design their lives. And I've become endlessly fascinated over the years now, and having interviewed so many extraordinary creative people, about how they become who they are. How do you choose to do what you do? How do you choose to overcome obstacles or not? How do you make things that fulfill your soul? And so over the last 2 or 3 years, especially, I've been interviewing more than just designers. I've been interviewing musicians and artists and writers and performers of all sorts. So this coming season, I have Marina Abramovich, the performance artist. For people that might not know who she is, she was the woman at the Museum of Modern Art who sat and stared at people for months on end. And I want to tell you, I'm not going to do this, but I'm really, really tempted to just sit with her for an hour and not talk.
That would be a fascinating podcast.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
But I don't think people would think that there was something wrong with the podcast, and then I'd get lots of emails about something wrong with the audio. But I do really kind of want to do that.
You could always tape and release one of those just for fun and just leave it out there.
Right.
I mean, it'll get a lot of plays.
Right, 2 podcasts, one talking, one sitting.
Yeah.
I think that, I might do that, Dan,
It's
and
not a
I
bad
will
idea.
totally give you total full credit for that.
It is not a bad idea.
So Richard Saul Wurman, who's the creator of the TED Conference, Emma Donahue, who wrote the amazing, amazing book Room and many others, but the book that then became an Academy Award-winning movie. Naomi Klein. It's Esther Perel, who has a new book out calling The State of the Affair. She wrote Meeting in Captivity
She's
about...
wonderful.
Yeah, she's amazing. So it's going to be, I think, a really exciting season for me.
Yeah, and that's the other reason why we do podcasts, is to meet really incredible people with different backgrounds and just get them to open up, which is why I'm really glad you came onto the show.
Well, and you also have to include somebody on your show that was an old school paste-up designer at the magazine back in its first format.
It's a relatively small group of people we're drawing from. So let me ask you some of the questions I ask all my guests. What technological trend concerns you the most in the future? Is there anything that keeps you up at night that you're worried about?
Yes, yes. The current generation, Generation Z, their nickname, you probably know this already, is Generation D. D for depressed, because they are so used to living online that they are endlessly comparing themselves to others. And so if they don't have enough Instagram likes on a photo, they take it down. They see the grass always being greener, and they're living in this state of constant comparison. And I find that really concerning. You know, initially, MySpace became so popular back in 2005 because if you remember those years right before, what everybody was calling the isolation nation, this way that we were living in our iPods that isolated us from everybody else. And we were living in our own self-curated currency. One of the reasons that MySpace became so popular in 2005 was because it allowed us to connect through the device. And as Dan Formosa has said, we weren't in love with the devices. We thought we were in love with the devices. We weren't in love with the devices. We were in love with the connection that we got through the device to others, globally, anywhere. Now what's happened is because we are connected to everybody in that device, we do what humans do. You know, biologically, we compare. And now we find that we might not have as many friends. Why do we need to know how many followers we have? Yeah. Why do we need to know how many friends we have? Why do we need to know how many people like things? So it's inevitable that we're comparing.
It's interesting, too, when you talk about it as a generational issue. So I don't use Instagram that way. I would never deleted an Instagram post unless I've got a typo in it, which happens a lot.
Twitter needs to bring us that ability to edit. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, so that's why I would take something down, but I think that the way a 15-year-old would experience that same technology would be very different than the way I experience it.
Yeah.
And it creates these feedback loops, and the technology is moving so fast that we may create the technology, put it out there into the world, and go, oh, this is how most people use it, and not think how it would affect 15-year-old, an adolescent mind. And it could be very, very different than the way the developers intended it.
And what else, you know, we're projecting these images of ourselves that aren't entirely complete. And we are far less likely to put up, I'm really feeling fat and bloated today, than, oh, wow, look at this thing that's on this great site that I did. And it's concerning. And I do it too. I went through a very tough fall of 2015. My father died. I went through a breakup. It was really, really hard times for me. And I thought I was posting authentically. I met somebody in the street that I hadn't seen in a while, and she asked me how I was doing, and I said, you know, I'm really not doing well. And she's like, oh, you seem fine on Facebook. And it would occur to me, everybody's fine on Facebook. Everybody is fine on Facebook. So we're projecting these images, and that's not so great.
And on Instagram, not only are you fine, you're living large.
Oh my God.
Like, I mean, my Instagram feed makes me look like the most interesting man in the world.
Yeah.
And then I'm really not.
No, and I mean, you very well may be, but it's not a really good thing for people to be looking at things constantly and feeling that they're not as good as. It's hard enough to live in the world as it is, to then be comparing yourselves. I mean, it's one thing to compare yourself to Angelina Jolie. It's quite another thing to compare yourself to somebody that you don't know, that you will never know. Well, maybe, you know, I don't know Angelina either, but you know what I'm saying.
She'll be on the next season of Design Matters.
Right. Yeah, because I want to talk to her all about what she's projecting out there in the world. Yeah. But it's difficult when you're projecting, when you're witnessing somebody projecting something that you believe is true, that they don't believe is true. And I think that that's scary.
On the optimistic side, is there a technological trend you're really optimistic about?
Well, I think that the way that we're using branding online to create movements and to create solidarity, and I also feel that there's an invisible hand out there, and we go back and forth with the supply and the demand and with the way in which we use technology. So the reason why MySpace was so popular was because it was able to connect a disparate group of people that were feeling isolated. We'll see something. I think the biggest brands that are going to be coming are the ones that make us feel okay as is online. Mm-hmm. And whoever can do that will end up getting lots and lots of support.
Yeah, that's an interesting white space opportunity.
Yeah.
Is there an app, a device, or a service that you use every day that's just changed your life?
Oh, this is going to be the Apple Pencil.
Really?
Because I love drawing and writing, and now I can actually have the same experience that I mean, I don't feel the scratchiness that I miss from the texture of paper, but the Apple Pencil has transformed the way I make art.
Interesting. And do you use it just for art? Do you use it for note taking?
No, I just use it for art.
Just for art. So you use it like a pen. Like
I do.
It is your paintbrush.
Yes.
Interesting. Do you so aside from Design Matters, where people can find you in all the different podcast locations, how can people find you online and track your authentic self?
Oh God, well, I don't know that exists because I'm still searching for my authentic self. But my website, debbiemillman.com, the School of Visual Arts, where I run a graduate program in branding, and on all the usual places, Twitter, Facebook,
All right, we'll put
all those joints.
We'll put those links in the notes. Debbie, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you so much.
And that is Fast Forward for today. I want to thank you for stopping by and spending your time with us. You can find this show and archives of all of our other shows online at PCMag.com, on Apple Podcasts and Google Play, and everywhere else that fine podcasts are given away for free. Before you go, leave us a comment below. We always appreciate those as well. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'll see you in the future.